In 1936, as the Nazis prepared to stage the Summer Olympics in Germany, 9 working-class boys in the American Northwest nurtured an impossible dream.
They came out of nowhere, out of logging camps, dairy farms, shipyards, and small dusty towns. But in 1936, in an old shell house at the University of Washington, they found one another, and together they set on an epic saga. Ahead of them lay the prospect of Olympic gold. They crushed the 2-time Olympic champions at the University of California. They beat the best crews in the East, the well-heeled sons of bankers and lawyers and corporate titans. They took on rowing's elite aristocratic British boys from Oxford and Cambridge and smashed the world's record to win the right to row for gold. Then, in Berlin, the heart of the new Nazi state, the stage was set. On a nearby balcony, Adolf Hitler stood watching. Out on the water, his German boys wore swastikas on their chests. The crowd, 75,000 strong, began to chant, "Deutschland, Deutschland, Deutschland," and the flag was dropped.
Few people realize the importance of Lake Union in the world of rowing. One of the finest builders of racing shells the world has ever known, George Pocock, had his shop on Lake Union. And his boats were known and respected all over the world. Rowers from Seattle, from the university, and those who come here to row in clubs have made a reputation for themselves and for this country out of the experience of rowing and learning how to row on Lake Union. Rowing as a sport began in England when the river ferrymen became competitive for the simple reason that the man who could move the fastest probably picked up the most fares, and along with competition came a refinement of the boats, and they became finer and longer and faster. Oxford and Cambridge became probably the first of the colleges to take up rowing. The idea was that a healthy, vigorous boy could learn better than a boy who did nothing vigorous and strenuous. Rowing found its place in the United States for somewhat similar reasons. The University of Washington rowing program began formally in 1903. Hiram Conobere's name has been associated with Washington rowing from the very beginning. It was he who brought the sport to the university, although in fact he himself was no oarsman. He eventually decided that he's going to have to get some boats built, and he heard about some local builders in Canada, George and Richard Pocock, so he decided to go up there and interview them. So he first appears on his way across Cole Harbor to the floating boat shed that the Pococks had set up, and they caught sight of this fellow floundering around in a rowboat, making his way in a very erratic course to their shop. They helped him aboard and were a little surprised to learn that he was a rowing coach. I think they tried very hard not to laugh, because it was manifestly absurd that a man who couldn't manage a rowboat any better than that could coach rowing. And then he made them a deal that was irresistible, that they should come down and open a shop near the University of Washington. He could promise them orders for more boats. And in due course they came down, and then found out that in fact he had no money, so they found themselves in Seattle with a shop set up in a tea room left over from the Seattle Yukon Exposition, a ramshackle building. It was only built to last for a matter of months rather than for years. The Pococks had unique talents as boat builders. They'd both come from the Thames. They had built boats from boyhood and knew the craft, which they learned from their father. And so they were well established as boat builders before they left England. But they developed a type of boat on Lake Union that was superb in its engineering and also built of the finest boat building wood that George Pocock had ever seen. which is the western red cedar. The consequence of it was that he could build boats that would hold their shape and probably were an improvement on any boats that had been built previously. Eventually they had quite a market for their boats from colleges all around the country. George loved the work he did, and he loved the wood that he worked with. George used to say, wood, the perfect plastic, because he could make wood do anything he wanted it to. And I never saw him in a shop without his hand on a boat. His hand was always caressing the wood. It was as if he were finishing it with sandpaper so fine that you could hardly detect it. The association between the Pococks and the University of Washington continued because the coaches and oarsmen found them very, very helpful in learning the nuances of the sport. Both George and his brother Richard had been champions in professional races in England, so their hand was evident both in the building of the boats and the rowing of the boats.
£3.
How long is it?
26 feet. And look at that wood, brother. You've almost got to worship it. The years it took to grow. And you know, you look at it and you see some years that it almost perished. Sometimes there'd be hardly a grain, that it practically was inert, didn't grow at all. And then moisture came again and away she went. There's a sense of fulfillment when you build a good boat, looking at it, a sense of fulfillment, of good craftsmanship. I don't care whether it's rowing or whether it's skiing or what. You've got to acquire a technique to fulfill that sense of good craftsmanship.
I came slowly to realize that rowing, when it's done well, is beautiful. And I learned from talking to many rowers that rowers oftentimes have what they describe as almost spiritual experiences out on the water. And in the book, this is embodied in the person of George Pocock. It was an English boat builder who built these beautiful cedar shells that the boys from Washington and ultimately every crew in the country wound up buying Pocock shells eventually. Pocock handcrafted these gorgeous cedar shells. And to him, craftsmanship was everything. Reaching for perfection was everything. Reaching for something higher was everything. And he mentored these boys to do that in their rowing, to row not just to win, but to make something, to reach for something greater than themselves. And he wound up being a sort of spiritual guide to these boys. And I have a quote here from him that sort of sums that up. He said, "It's a great art is rowing. It's the finest art there is. It's a symphony of motion. And when you are rowing well, why, it's nearing perfection. And when you near perfection, you're touching the divine. It touches the you of you, the you of yous, which is your soul." The number one thing that I learned from this, as I say, 6-year odyssey of learning about these boys and their accomplishment, the thing that I want to leave you with most was the extraordinary bond of affection that they developed for one another and what it meant for the outcome of their quest. Crew demands, more than any other sport, crew demands an almost absolute surrender of the self to the common effort. Nobody can stand out in a crew. Everybody has to fall into a rhythm. Everybody's oar has to enter the water at exactly the same moment as everybody else's. There can't really be egos, or if there are egos, they have to be constrained. It's extraordinarily cooperative endeavor. Each rower really has to be in perfect physical and psychological rhythm with the others. Really, all of them need to meld into one perfect thing, and that's what these boys did. They melded into this one perfect thing. And I think that's what Joe was crying about all those years later when he remembered them. He wasn't remembering any one of them, he was remembering what they had been.
A 100,000 spectators crammed the stadium at Berlin to watch the world's crack athletes do battle for Olympic honors. Herr Hitler was received by a little girl with a bouquet when he arrived to declare the games open, accompanied by his staff. Then the nation's respective teams marched around the stadium with their colors borne at the head of each column. 30,000 pigeons were released to make a spectacle in the sky and tell the world that the games were on. The last athlete of a relay of runners from Mount Olympus in Greece came into the stadium bearing the flaming torch. How dreadful if he missed the step. One of the first races was the 10,000 meters. There was a huge entry for this long-distance test of endurance, and the lead was taken early by Japan. Near the finish, however, 3 representatives of Finland gave an exhibition of stamina and last-minute speed that would not have shamed their famous countryman Nurmi. Slow motion shows their magnificent style as they raced ahead to gain first 3 places for Finland. The 100-meter sprint was generally assumed to be a gift for the United States, and so it was. The brilliant Negro Jesse Owens flashed over the track to beat his fellow countryman Metcalf in 10 3/10 seconds.
Switzerland, Hungary, Great Britain, America, Italy, and Germany are in the final. Leading nearest to us, Great Britain furthest away, second. Halfway, Italy still lead, but America on the far side have passed Great Britain. Here on the left, coming up hand over fist on Italy, are Germany. Last 100 yards. Great Britain leading on the far side, Italy coming up, Germany nearest to us third, Hungary fourth. But there's America away over there. Just in front to win by a yard. Italy second, Germany third.